Hey guys, so this vlog, as you can probably tell by the title of it, is going to be a bit different. And those of you who don't sort of have any experience with something like an eating disorder or something like that might feel like it's a bit weird or feel confronted by it for some reason. But this video isn't really for you. It's for people who are going through it or have gone through it, or perhaps want to learn more about it, or maybe just sort of understand a little bit about where I come from in some elements of my personal life and history. The reason that I'm talking about my previous struggle with an eating disorder is because late last week I made a video where I was celebrating having reached a personal fitness goal, and I was really excited about that. And in that video I sort of mentioned very briefly that 8 years ago I overcame bulimia.
When I was dealing with my eating disorder like 8 years ago, I had bulimia, and I overcame that through counselling. I got some help and therapy.
There were a lot of comments in that video from people who are currently struggling with an eating disorder or who have struggled with it, asking me to talk about it more. And it's actually something that I've only sort of mentioned very briefly on like 2 or 3 occasions tops in my entirety of my time on YouTube. I've never actually talked about it. I remember in my Draw My Life video, I mentioned it very briefly.
And this resulted in me gaining more weight and losing more self-esteem. I'd always been chubby and pretty sensitive about it, to be honest, but I began to be really unhappy, and I was mostly housebound with a terrible limp. What I saw in the mirror was not very good. I was struggling with an eating disorder and some pretty rough self-esteem issues.
That was also because the Draw My Life video was sort of a real in-depth covering of who I am and a lot of the things I went through, and yet I also didn't go into detail about that part of my past. So I'm making this video for the people who have asked me to share a little bit more personally. It's not a particularly profound experience or anything, but I know from my experience that when you're trying to overcome something like that, it's a very personal experience, and it's also very difficult in a personal way, in a way that a lot of outside people don't really understand. And beyond that, when you're going through something like bulimia, and I'm sure anorexia and other eating disorders, there's a need and a hope for some connection, for some support from people who understand. And I know when I was recovering from or trying to overcome my bulimia a while back, I was hoping to hear from people like me. And I actually remember looking up videos on YouTube at the time to specifically male bulimia. I wanted to hear from a guy who had gone through it, and I really couldn't find much. So I guess that's another reason I'm motivated to put this out there finally, is because there aren't many examples that I know of men out there who are actually, willing to talk about it if they've gone through it, because it is something that affects men from time to time. But, overall, I think just adding my perspective is something that hopefully can help people. Anyways, I've talked a lot about setting the premise. I want to go through from the beginning and just start off by saying that though I have a lot of fun in my videos and I'm a bit wacky and all that from time to time, I'm a very sensitive person, and I'm also a very self-critical person. And from the time I was a teenager, especially going into high school, I got bullied a bit, didn't have many friends, and I became pretty introverted. At the same time, I was also attention-seeking, so that obviously it doesn't seem to make sense or go together. On the one hand, I really kept to myself because I didn't have many allies, and on the other hand, I sort of deferred attention away from my insecurities by, from time to time, being over the top and very goofy or ridiculous. Now, the reason I mention that is because going back from the age of 12 or so, I was also really self-conscious physically as I gained weight due to unhealthy habits and lifestyles, and also just sort of not feeling good about myself in my then life situation. As the years went on and later into being a teenager, I think around the age of 15, I started to engage in bulimia. Now, for those of you who don't know, bulimia is that it sounds gross, and it is a bit gross, but in the psychology when you're going through it, it doesn't seem that weird. It's less about food and more about control. Bulimia is the act of binging and purging, when you feel like you have no control over what you're doing to food and to your body, and you intake and intake and intake, and then you're angry and you hate yourself, and then to exercise control and almost in spite of, or to act aggressively towards your own body, you throw up that food, and that's a cycle. And it's not a healthy cycle, as you can imagine. The human body is not made to do that. In a weird way, my eating disorder was facilitated by the fact that, and actually discovered because of, a party trick. So there's like Guinness World Records people who would like swallow a grape and bring it back up. I figured I found out I could do that a little bit. And then I also realized that it was actually a time my family all went to eat at a buffet, and I ate a lot. And by the time I was finished, everyone was still like on their first course, and I'd had like 2 or 3, and I felt like garbage. And I went to the toilet and I did that. I purged. And all of a sudden I felt free. I felt empty of the guilt and that weight of that feeling, that full stomach feeling, that tight feeling that made me hate myself was gone. And it was like a weird revelation. And I didn't understand. I had no knowledge of eating disorders, and because I wasn't intentionally doing things like shoving my hand down my throat or anything so aggressive, it seemed like not that big a deal. And I went back to the table and had some dessert, it was so disconnected from any understanding of its negativity. But that's when it started for me, when I was about 15, 16. And over the years, it just became just a part of my routine, particularly if there was a big meal involved or a buffet or things like that, to the point where at least several times a week I would be doing this to keep myself in a state of feeling okay with myself. And it's not healthy. It's unhealthy, both physically and mentally, to depend on something like that, to depend on a mechanism that is not what your body's meant to do, but also reinforces awful habits and doesn't educate yourself or help your understanding of things. Anyways, so time went on, and there were 2 experiences that really shook me, that caused me to realize I needed to give this up. By the time I was 21, there was one occasion in particular when I was woken up and I realized this is a serious problem. Now, keep in mind, by this time, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, this has been like going on 8 years that I had normalized this awful behavior. But beyond that I had solidified such unhealthy feelings about myself. My feelings of self-hate, to not to put too fine a point on it, were pretty strong, and something that people on the outside looking in would never have seen. I'm a very internalized, thoughtful person. As wacky as I may be and as much fun as I have, I'm often very critical of myself, and I often feel certain ways about myself, or especially in the past, before I was very aware of it and knew how to combat it. The experience in particular that shook me was actually a LAN party. A whole bunch of friends and family got together to play Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2 and all this stuff, and as part of that, what do you call it, event, there was always junk food. Lots and lots of junk food. Just crap everywhere. Potato chips and pizza and lollies and soft drink. And I remember, and these LAN parties, especially back in the day, it was like, trying to go all night and all this stuff. And on this one occasion, from 7 p.m. to, I think it was somewhere like 1 or 2 a.m., I had binged and purged about 8 or 9 times in one night. And that last time, there was this moment where I was like, there is something seriously wrong with me. I am completely out of control. I was shocked at my own behavior and just mortified at my own lack of control, and felt like I hated myself even more for not being a normal person. Like, normal people don't do this. Why am I doing this? And why have I been doing this for so long? And that was when I realized this is a problem and I need to fix it. And the first steps I took were to speak to a few trusted people about it. A couple of close friends, a couple of family members. Oh, speaking of which, and around this time, when I started to acknowledge it and try and overcome it, and up until this point had never been caught out, so to speak, I was acknowledging it, coming to terms with this being a serious problem and trying to figure it out, and at the same time battling with trying to not do it, which also meant that occasionally I would sort of relapse or succumb to those feelings. And on one particular occasion, I was at my sister's house with other members of my family, and during the course of the evening, once I specifically remember trying not to, thinking, I don't need to do this. And in the end, I gave in and I went and purged in her bathroom. But because I had held off for an hour or whatever, there was an acidic smell to go with it. Again, this is probably not the most pleasant thing to hear, but if you've made it this far, I guess it's not that shocking. And one of my brothers came out of the bathroom 15 minutes later and said, "Oh man, it smells like puke in there." And a few of the family members sort of like had a laugh, and then there was like this weird switch. There was this weird realization in a few people in the family where they realized actually that I had been sick. And I think based on my response, because I became, obviously my face probably went red, I became really quiet, I didn't joke around with them. And then the whole tone of the evening changed very quickly, and a few people ended up going home, and my sister sat down across from me 15 minutes after some people had left and said, "Are you okay? Are you feeling sick?" And I said, "No." And she asked if I made myself sick, and I said yes. And that was one of the people I spoke to about this problem. And it was another moment of realization that I was out of control and that this was something that was not normal, as became very apparent to me by the response of some people in this room. By the way, all of my family members, obviously not knowing how to respond to it in that moment, each had also expressed love and concern after that when, time went on, or there were ways to try and figure out how to communicate about that. But understandably, in that moment, it was a bit of a shock for everyone. Anyways, so from there, after sharing and confiding with a few specific people to sort of keep myself accountable and aware that this is something that I need to deal with, I sought counselling. I saw our family counsellor, someone who people in our family sort of trust, and she sort of knows us and all this stuff. And that was good because I felt like I had someone I could trust and who sort of knew me. But I would have gone to someone new if I didn't have that available. And the reason I mention this is because if there are people watching this who struggle with it, this was one of the major factors that actually helped me overcome it, was professional help. And I wholeheartedly recommend people trying to overcome particular struggles like this to seek professional help. Ignore the printer sound over there. Anyway, so from there I got better, but not fully better. Over the coming year, I would have much longer periods of being resilient and being able to fend it off. And as I mentioned very briefly in the video last week, one of the things that the counsellor encouraged me to do was to use a mantra, use an affirmation, I think is the word. She encouraged me to look in the mirror and say, "You are beautiful just the way you are." And just to say it several times until it didn't feel completely stupid. And it did feel completely stupid, but I was determined to overcome this. So I did it. I did it every day. It felt completely stupid, but by repeating it and maintaining eye contact with myself and repeating it and just trying to soak that in every day, eventually I actually started to feel a bit different about myself. I was opening up myself to a perspective of acceptance that I hadn't been very open to in the past. Beyond that, Something also that sort of happened that helped shift my thinking, and this was just my experience, was I grew out my facial hair a little bit. Just I got like this chin strap beard thing happening, and looking back I cringe, but at the time it was something different. And I don't know if this would help other people who are trying to overcome a similar thing. And if a visual tweak, if the thing that is getting them in that place is how they feel when they see themselves, which my shadow would sicken me. My reflection made me feel sick to my stomach. But there was something different as I was retraining my brain to be more accepting and loving of myself. So growing out that facial hair was just a little thing that helped me to think, you know, this is new, this is different, and it helped me accept myself in a weird way. It was a part of helping me through this process. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is this was a longer period of recovery, about I think 7 or 8 months of transition, where I was doing better and better and better. And there was one last experience where, and this was my final snap into being having recovered, where I was actually doing a local amateur theatre show. One of the ones where I met my wife. I played opposite my now wife in one of our early shows together, and that was really fun. But I didn't know I was going to marry her at the time. We were just really good friends. But during the course of this show, it was a very operatic show, and I'm not a very operatic singer, but I did my best, and it was definitely a lot of work on my voice. And I hadn't at that time purged for a significant period of time. I think like a couple of months. But during the run of the show, and I think maybe just during dress rehearsals and before the show started, I gave in at one point and purged. I think the week of, but before a show. The reason this was an interesting shake-up for me was because 2 days later I was losing my voice really badly, and I feel like it was because of the acid, the stomach acid that passed through my throat, as it's not really meant to. I'm just being totally blunt with all of this, by the way, so, you know, I'm sure plenty of people will have been grossed out by now, but there are enough people who I'm hoping will benefit from the frank nature of this video that I'm just not holding back. Anyway, so as I mentioned, I did that, and it was, I remember the last time I did it, and I think it sort of goes hand in hand with trying to hold back for so long from doing it and then giving in, that there's a lot of physically, you know, involved stuff at play that's progressed in the digestion of food, such as stomach acid. So I had trouble singing in the first week, or a specific week in the run of the show, and nearly entirely lost my voice. And that was one of the moments that it woke me up to be like, this is spoiling my life. This is taking experiences that would have been fulfilling and wonderful and taking them away from me. I'm doing that. I'm hurting myself, thinking I'm saving myself from a type of pain, but inflicting a much worse type of pain, rather than understanding, rather than educating myself on what I can and shouldn't eat, or just having a healthier approach rather than eating the whole cake, just eating a piece and being okay with that, you know. And then also beyond that, realizing that feeling of feeling full or even over full is okay. Like, you can live with that. It's not ideal, especially if you're dealing with an eating disorder and there are neuroses surrounding that are going to trigger certain emotional and mental responses and even physical reactions. But even with that at play, you can decide to be okay with it. Tomorrow will come and this feeling won't be here anymore. The difference is, I can be in control, not in an angry way, but in an accepting and just resilient but calm way. It's okay. You're okay. So that moment, that show was a wake-up call for me. And that was literally the last time that I purged. And I think I was 21 or 22. And I haven't done it since. And I'm currently, I think 28. I lose count for some reason. And I'm never going to do it again. Now, that's not to say that the neuroses don't come back now and then, or that if I feel full, I don't feel a little bit sick, you know, or even just like emotionally angry at myself. But I've gained a valuable tool, and that is acceptance. That is saying, you know what, people make mistakes. And you know what, maybe even I've gained 5 or 10 kilos in the last year or two because of having a baby with my wife or not being as active. But this meal doesn't need to make me hurt myself because of an overall feeling that may have been gathering or anything like that. I've learned because of my experience to be okay with that. And if I want to address something like how I feel about myself physically, to do that in constructive ways. That's why I have a personal trainer now. I exercise with him 3 times a week. I did a session this morning, and it transforms the way I feel about my body into something I'm actively participating in the upholding of and in, you know, making better and being healthy rather than reacting to negative feelings and stuff. So that's my experience. That's from the start to where I am now. And this has been a pretty long video and I've been pretty frank through it all, but I'm really hoping that some people who have watched this, and I'm sure there will just be a couple of handfuls maybe, who see this video will get something helpful for their experience. And that's why I'm sharing it. The other thing I want to finish off on and share in this video, I'll put the link to it in the description, is Jaden Animation's video on her experience with bulimia. Now, I attempted to make this video, me talking to you, sharing my experience, a week after she released her video. I was so impacted by her account and touched by her bravery that I tried to do it myself, and it was like a blubbering mess. I was just like crying the whole time, and it was, you know, and then also it felt a bit wrong coming out so close after her video, and I think without being as gathered as I am in this video in comparison, I ended up not editing or releasing it, so I just left that. But it's always been something I've felt like I should come back to for the sake of the people it might help, in the same way that Jaden's video has helped a lot of people. I'm hoping that in the same way that when I was searching for a bit of help in a particular way, or wanting to see a couple of, you know, male role models who I could relate to, you know, sharing their experience, I'm hoping that I can do that. So that's why I'm sharing this. But go check out Jaden's video, because if at the very least, even if you're not experiencing it yourself, if you struggle to understand an eating disorder or the psychology of it, rather than from a physical perspective, which most people are somewhat confused by, it's the psychological and mental stuff that really makes it what it is, that really is the battle. And Jaden's video is powerful and really, really it speaks for itself. I encourage you to go watch that, because it's a fantastic and brave representation of that. So I also, you know, I doubt she'll even see this, but my heart goes out to Jaden, and I thank her so much. And I did thank her on Skype at the time she released it, and I'm sure she got a lot of people saying that. And sometimes it might go over your head, especially when you become vulnerable and you know, open up like that. But yeah, I was really proud of her for doing that. And I'm really hoping that just in sharing my short experience with you guys, that it can be in some small way encouraging and help make some people's lives better. Anyways, this has been a very different video, as you can imagine. So I'm just going to wrap it up there and just keep it nice and simple, and not worry about questions of the day or going through what I'm working on today or anything. It's all pretty basic stuff. But my heart goes out to anyone who's trying to recover from something like this. Just know that there is support. You're not alone. You're not completely insane. You're a normal, beautiful person, and everyone has rough patches in different ways. You know, I went through that one and I've gone through other ones. It's just part of being human, and that's okay. And there are communities out there that can help you. There are professional counselors who are trained to help you understand yourself and accept yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.